Hello everybody. Earlier this year I had the genius idea to shoot what might be the first and only car review on YouTube shot on 16mm film. For no reason really other than I wanted to, and it seemed like it would be an awful lot of fun. Now, many of you were really behind the idea and generously donated to the Just Giving page that I set up for the project. Everything was going swimmingly. I was in the process of finding crew, buying the film, organising the kit, and all that jazz. We were due to shoot this month, and I even had a brilliant car lined up that would have suited the project absolutely perfectly. Sadly, our friend COVID reared his ugly head and, as he does with most things, just ruined everything. As you might imagine, filmmaking is something of a communal project, and so I've taken the executive decision not to cancel the project, but simply to push it back until next year. However, I decided to say thank you to all of you lovely people who have donated to do this. I've dusted off the old family video camera, and today I'm creating a little project not on film, but on old school video. We're taking the channel back to 1997. So, I'm going to get myself dressed in a style befitting the late 1990s, and you're going to join me on videotape. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's instalment of JayEmm 97. Later in the programme, can the Renault Sport Spider really go toe-to-toe with Lotus's all-conquering Elise? Plus, in our sporting section, Ralf Schumacher better than his brother? And we take a look at the new Peugeot 406 Coupe. Have Pininfarina finally managed to make a genuinely desirable modern Peugeot? But before all of that, we're taking a look at the latest version of one of Pininfarina's other greatest hits. The F355 has become something of a legend in its own lifetime. Last year, on one of his Christmas videotapes, Jeremy Clarkson called it the best car in the world ever. Faint praise perhaps from a man that loves leather jackets quite so much. However, there is no arguing. Few cars out there, if any, can match the 355 for its combination of desirability and sheer driving enjoyment. The Lotus Esprit may give you similar looks at a lower price, and the 911 Turbo can outgun even the Ferrari. But determined not to rest on their laurels, Ferrari have introduced an exciting new piece of technology to the 355. 12 months ago, we attended the launch of the fabulous 550 at the world-famous Nürburgring racetrack. While we were there, the engineers told us that for that car, they were preparing a new and unusual type of gearbox that had never been seen in a road car before. At the time, they called it the Cellespeed. Well, it's here in the showrooms now, and you can buy it, but not in a 550. Ferrari instead decided to launch it with the 355. And it's not called Cellespeed anymore, it's called F1. Until now, the closest you'd get to a sporty semi-automatic gearbox on the road would have been Porsche's Tiptronic system. But in truth, that simply is an automatic gearbox with buttons on the steering wheel. Ferrari, as you might expect, have taken a completely different approach. Now, they say robots are going to replace us all one day, but evidently they intend to do it a piece at a time. Because here, unlike in the Porsche Tiptronic system, connected to Ferrari's fabulous 3.5 litre 5-valve per cylinder flat plane crank V8, you have the same 6-speed gearbox as you'd find in a manual car. But in place of the third pedal and stick, you've got this fabulous thing. They call it an F1 actuator, and it can remotely control the clutch and gearbox for you. And it's a lot better than your eye, you see, because in sport mode, and when the engine is above 7,000 RPM, no chore with this fabulous power plant, this system can change gears in as little as 125 milliseconds. Not bad. Now, that may all sound very complicated, but the actual process of changing gears couldn't be any easier. Simply put, you use these two paddles on either side of the steering column. They don't move because Ferrari are concerned that people might get a little bit confused if they went around with the wheel. To go down, you pull this small panel on the left, and to go up, the slightly larger one on the right. No need to worry about forgetting which is which, because they each stay on them. To go into reverse, you'll pull this small, strange-looking lever here in the center console, which takes up the space where the beautiful gated shifter used to be. And next to it, two buttons which are specific to the F1 gearbox car. Auto will do what you think. It means that the car can then choose gear as it wants to. And next to it, a special mode for poor traction conditions. And that will make the car change up at fairly low RPM and will also avoid the lower gears where it can. Other than that, the rest of the car is exactly as you'd find in any other F355, with the small exception of the F on the back, which has now moved because Ferrari didn't want to make an F355 F1, so this is simply the 355 F1. So, how much do Ferrari want for all of this space-age trickery? Well, to the standard price of a regular 355, just under £100,000, you can add another £6,000. It may be faster than a manual, but is it better? Let's find out. Much about this car does, of course, feel very familiar to me because I've actually done a number of miles in a 355. It was an earlier car, a manual GTS. This, as you may have noticed, is the Spider. And I have to say, I'm not really a fan of the way that it looks. I much prefer the elegant simplicity of the Targa Top car. You can't really say that this is any easier to use either because the top is this weird combination of both manual and electric. And if you don't want the thing to look like an awful mess, you need to put the tonneau cover on as we have today. This being a later car, you also have this large and fairly ugly airbag-equipped steering wheel, unlike the beautiful and delicate item that you got in the first versions of the car. But we're not here today to discuss any of that. We're here primarily to talk about this newfangled gearbox. The first thing that you have to understand about it, and the most important thing if you are to have any chance of success, is to realize this is not an automatic gearbox. If you can understand that, you're going to have a much better time. It is a robotized manual. It is a semi-automatic box. So first thing, never ever press the automatic button down there. Just don't do it. When you're changing up, particularly at lower speeds, take your foot off the throttle. That will make the shift much easier, much smoother. And once you've done that, you realize that the car actually can shift just as well as many good automatics. Observe. Smooth, pleasant. Downshifts are the same too. There you go, down to fifth, down to fourth. You know which gear you're in thanks to a very clear, if slightly unpleasant looking, little red LED display here, which takes the place of, I believe, one of the temperature dials. It is at the very lowest speeds where this system really seems to be at its weakest, because when you're trying to pull away, you can feel the car working the clutch and it's just not very pleasant. In traffic, you can expect the clutch not to last very long. Ferrari tell me that for all of their demonstrator vehicles, they are taking the precautionary measure of replacing clutches at 6,000 miles. Many of them are coming out the car in good condition, but they want all of the journalists to be able to experience the system at its absolute best. They believe customer cars should last quite a bit longer, at least triple the mileage, dependent, as it would be in a manual car, on usage. If you attempt the shift with your foot still on the accelerator, it will do it, but it's nowhere near as smooth. Observe. You see there, if I then control the throttle, everything is just that much better. And here's where it gets really interesting. That footwell is no different to the early cars, other than the fact it is, of course, missing a clutch. But there is a very good reason for that. This is still a cable-operated throttle, which means that the response is still magnificent. The sound coming out of this car, I'm happy to report, is still just as good as ever, even though changes have been made to make sure the 355 can still comply with all of the current regulations. because it is a cable system, the car has no way of being able to blip the throttle to rev match on its own. So it needs your help if it's going to do its best. Here, this is a downshift without any help. It's okay, but it's not the best. Now let me go from third to second and I will rev match the car. Brilliant. The robots, it would seem, aren't quite ready to take over the world just yet because they still need our help. It doesn't have the ultimate firepower or the low down punch of a 550, but this engine more than makes up for it with an amazing willingness to rev all the way to about 8,500. This really is one of the all-time greats. There I can actually heel and tow with this system, and it really likes it. So we have now a straight piece of road, and I'm going to see with sport mode engaged what this system is like. In the interests of science, I do need to get the car above 7,500 RPM. Doesn't actually feel lightning fast. It's not the sort of crack that you will hear from Mr. Schumacher's weekend wheels, but it's still very enjoyable. Even at full throttle, if you want the smoothest experience, you should still lift off. Sport mode will change the responsiveness of not just the gearbox, but a few other things on this car as well. A 355 is equipped with electronically adjustable dampers, and sport mode firms them up a little bit. Personally, I actually prefer this car in normal mode. Should you want to engage neutral at any point in time, you simply pull both paddles simultaneously and that'll let you do silly things. Like, for example, blip the throttle for passing schoolboys. It is amazing what difference a simple bit of rev matching can make to the performance of this gearbox on the downshifts. Let's demonstrate that. So I'm going to go now from fourth to second, simply using the gearbox and not helping it. To third, to second. It's pretty smooth, it's not bad. And let's work our way back up through the box. And now let's do the same thing again, same mode, all that jazz, but we're going to help it. Far better, and actually a brilliant system. For those interested in this new habit of track days, I would say that this is a pretty good thing to have. It means you're less likely to make a catastrophically expensive mistake. Of course, with so much of this car still being standard, many of the 355's greatest traits still shine through. It is superbly comfortable, even with sport mode engaged. The sound is perhaps the best of any car that I've heard in a very long time. And it's got ample storage up the front too. Unlike the earlier car that I drove, this one also has electrically adjustable seats. Only in slide, not in tilt. And it's very odd really, but I think that's something to do with the Spider setup. Worried that the idea of fitting an automatic gearbox to their prime sports car meant the Ferrari was going a little bit soft, needn't be concerned. This is not a box designed to make the car easier to drive. It's built to make it go faster. Anybody who thought the 355 was too much hassle and faff in 6-speed manual form is highly unlikely to be convinced by the F1 box. However, I can see a day in the not too distant future where this may be the only system that Ferrari offer. It's not perfect, but if you want a sports car with 2 pedals, the 355 is still the king. So that's it from me. I've actually been very impressed with the 355's new F1 gearbox. It's certainly the best sporty automatic transmission on the market at the moment. I'd still order my 355 with the classic manual, and I'd take the money saved and spend it on a pair of bucket seats, which Ferrari will also happily supply you for a similar price. Anyway, that's enough from me, and now with the news, my co-host, Quentin Wilson.